Have you ever felt trapped? Not by walls or chains, but by a situation that seems endless, a silence from the heavens that feels deafening. Have you ever wondered if your greatest strength might also be the seed of your spectacular downfall? Today, we journey back 3,000 years to a land suffocated by oppression, to uncover the story of a man born with the power of a demigod, but cursed with the heart of a mortal. His life was a whirlwind of breathtaking miracles and heartbreaking mistakes, a story you think you know, but one whose true meaning is often lost in the spectacle. We will explore the man behind the muscle, the passion that fueled him, and the final desperate prayer that would shake the very foundations of an empire. This is a story of strength, betrayal, and a redemption so explosive it would be written in rubble and remembered for all time. Before we descend into this epic tale, take a moment. Look around you. Where in the world are you listening to this from, and what time is it on your clock? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's incredible to think how a story this ancient can connect us all right here, right now, across thousands of miles and countless time zones. Let us know you're here with us, and then let the story begin. For 40 agonizing years, a suffocating blanket of despair had settled over the hills and valleys of Israel. The Philistines, a technologically superior and militarily ruthless people, held the land in an iron grip. Their rule was not just one of political domination, it was a slow, grinding erosion of a nation's soul. The vibrant faith that had once defined the Israelites, the faith of Abraham, Moses, and Joshua, now seemed like a distant echo, a half-forgotten legend. The Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence, had been captured and then returned, but its return did not bring back the glory. It was as if God himself had fallen silent. The age of prophets had seemingly passed. The era of miracles was a memory recounted by grandfathers with a wistful look in their eyes. The daily reality for the Israelites was one of tribute, of humiliation, of living as second-class citizens in their own ancestral land. Hope was a dangerous currency, and most had long since spent their last coin. But in the small, sun-baked village of Zorah, nestled in the foothills of the Shephelah, a sliver of that hope refused to be extinguished. It lived in the heart of a single, nameless woman, the wife of a man named Manoah. Their life was one of quiet piety, of adherence to the old ways in a world that had moved on. They had a home, they had sustenance, but their hearth was cold and their home was silent. They were childless. In their culture, this was more than a personal sadness. It was a mark of shame, a perceived sign of divine disfavor. Each passing year etched a new line of sorrow onto the woman's face. She watched the other women of the village with their children, their laughter echoing in the dusty streets, and a quiet, persistent ache would settle deep within her soul. It was a grief she bore with grace, never lashing out in bitterness, but it was a heavy burden nonetheless. Her prayers were not loud or performative. They were whispered conversations in the quiet of the night, desperate pleas sent up to a silent heaven. She would often walk to a place just outside the village, to the gnarled stump of an ancient olive tree, a place of solitude where she felt she could pour out her heart without judgment. There, under the vast, star-dusted canopy of the Middle Eastern sky, she would kneel, her hands resting on her barren womb, and speak to the God who felt so far away. One evening, as the sun bled its final crimson and orange hues across the horizon, she made her pilgrimage to the olive tree. The air was still, heavy with the scent of dry earth and distant wood smoke. She knelt, the familiar posture of supplication bringing a strange comfort. "Oh, Lord God," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor in the twilight. "Remember me. Please, look upon my affliction and remember me. Do not forget your handmaiden. If you will only give me a son, I will give him back to you. He will be yours for all the days of his life. A Nazirite consecrated from the womb. Just remember me." And in that moment, the silence was broken. Not by thunder, not by a rushing wind, but by a presence. A light purer and more intense than the fading sun coalesced before her. Out of this luminescence stepped a figure. He was not a warrior brandishing a sword, but the aura of power that emanated from him was more formidable than any army. His gaze seemed to penetrate her very soul, seeing all the years of her silent suffering and her unwavering faith. The woman, struck with a mixture of terror and awe, fell to her face, her forehead pressed against the cool earth. A voice, calm yet resonant with celestial authority, filled the space around her. It was not a shout, but it vibrated through every fiber of her being. "Do not be afraid," the angel of the Lord said. "Your prayer has been heard. Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death. No razor shall come upon his head. He will be the one who begins to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines." The light, the presence, the voice, it was overwhelming. The woman, still prostrate, could barely process the magnitude of the promise. A son, not just a son to fill her empty arms, but a deliverer. A beginning of the end of their long national nightmare. She lifted her head, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning joy. But the figure was gone. The light had vanished. The twilight had deepened, and the only sound was the gentle whisper of the evening breeze through the dry grasses. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She burst into her home, breathless, her face alight with a wild, holy excitement. She found her husband, Manoah, and the words tumbled out of her, a torrent of awe and wonder. "A man of God came to me," she gasped, "and his appearance was like the appearance of the angel of God, very awesome. I did not ask him where he was from, and he did not tell me his name, but he said to me, 'Behold, you shall conceive and bear a son.'" She relayed every detail of the divine encounter, the Nazirite vow, the promise of deliverance. Manoah, a devout but practical man, was stunned. He listened to his wife's fervent account, seeing the undeniable truth shining in her eyes. He too had prayed for a child, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. A child of prophecy, a hero destined to challenge an empire. The weight of it was immense. He immediately fell to his knees, his own prayer now filled with a new sense of urgency and humility. "O Lord," he pleaded, "let the man of God whom you sent come again to us and teach us what we are to do for the child who will be born." God heard the prayer of this faithful, bewildered man. Sometime later, as his wife was sitting in the field, the angel appeared to her again. She left him sitting and ran to tell her husband, "Behold, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me." Manoah arose and went with his wife, and when he came to the man, he said, "Are you the man who spoke to this woman?" And he said, "I am." Manoah, filled with a sense of reverent duty, asked, "Now when your words come true, what is to be the child's manner of life, and what is his mission?" The angel of the Lord repeated the instructions with patient authority. The Nazirite vows, the abstinence from wine and unclean food. This child was to be set apart, different from birth, holy unto God. Manoah, wanting to show hospitality, pressed the visitor to stay for a meal. "Let us prepare a young goat for you," he offered to. But the angel declined. "If you prepare a burnt offering," the divine messenger instructed, "you must offer it to the Lord." For Manoah still did not fully realize he was speaking directly with an angel. It was then that Manoah asked the question that burned in his heart, "What is your name, so that when your words come true, we may honor you?" The angel's reply was enigmatic, hinting at a nature beyond human comprehension. "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" A shiver of profound realization ran down Manoah's spine. Wonderful. Pele. It was a name used to describe God's own miraculous works. He understood then the true nature of their visitor. Acting quickly, Manoah took the young goat and a grain offering and placed them upon a large, flat rock that would serve as a makeshift altar. As he and his wife watched, a miracle unfolded. As the flames from the offering licked up toward heaven, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. He rose with the smoke and the fire, a being of heaven returning to his domain. The sight was so terrifyingly beautiful, so utterly beyond the realm of mortal experience, that Manoah and his wife fell on their faces to the ground. They lay there for a long time after the flames died down, the reality of what they had witnessed slowly sinking in. When they finally rose, the angel was gone, and they would not see him again. Manoah turned to his wife, his face pale with fear. "We shall surely die," he whispered, "for we have seen God." But his wife, her heart filled not with fear, but with a deep, abiding faith fortified by the promise, offered gentle reassurance. "If the Lord had meant to kill us," she reasoned, "he would not have accepted a burnt offering from our hands, nor shown us all these things, nor told us such things as these." Her logic was sound, born of a faith that had just been rewarded in the most spectacular way imaginable. In the fullness of time, the angel's promise was fulfilled. The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. They looked at his tiny form, at the shock of thick, dark hair already crowning his head, and they knew he was the child of the promise. They named him Samson, Shimshon in Hebrew, a name that means man of the sun. It was a fitting name, for it was as if a new sun was rising over the darkened land of Israel. As the boy grew, the Lord's blessing was evident upon him. There was an unusual vitality about him, a light in his eyes that seemed brighter, a strength in his small frame that was uncanny. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him, a divine power bubbling just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to erupt. The quiet corner of Zorah, once known only for its silent sorrow, was now the cradle of a legend. The stage was set, the hero was born. The 40-year silence was about to be shattered. Samson's childhood was a series of small, bewildering marvels. He was not a boisterous or aggressive boy by nature, but he possessed a physical power that was simply inexplicable. When other boys would struggle to lift a medium-sized rock, Samson could heave a small boulder with a casual grunt. While playing games of chase, he could outrun the fastest youths in the village without seeming to break a sweat. His parents, Manoah and his wife, watched him with a mixture of pride and apprehension. They had told him the story of his miraculous birth, of the angel's visit, and the Nazirite vow that set him apart. They taught him the laws of God and the history of their people, hoping to temper his physical prowess with spiritual wisdom. Yet Samson was a creature of profound contradictions. He possessed a sensitive soul, capable of being moved to tears by a song or a story of ancient heroism. He would often wander off by himself, leaving the company of others to sit on a hillside, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a pensive look on his young face. It was as if he could feel the divine energy stirring within him, a great and powerful force he didn't yet understand or know how to control. This power was a part of him, but it also made him an outsider. Other children were wary of his strength. Adults looked at him with a curious respect that bordered on fear. He was one of them, yet not. This sense of isolation would become a defining feature of his life, a loneliness that would often lead him to seek connection and affirmation in the wrong places. As he entered young manhood, the full, terrifying extent of his God-given strength began to manifest. It was no longer about lifting heavy stones. It was something raw, primal, and overwhelming. The first true test came unexpectedly. He was traveling through the vineyards of Timnah, a Philistine town. The journey was ill-advised, a foray into enemy territory driven by the stirrings of a restless heart. As he walked along a narrow path, the rustling in the nearby brush suddenly exploded into a terrifying roar. A young lion, powerful and hungry, burst from the cover and charged directly at him. For any other man, it would have been a moment of pure terror, a certain and brutal death. But as the lion leaped, something shifted inside Samson. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him with overwhelming force. Time seemed to slow. The world narrowed to the charging beast, its claws extended, its jaws agape. There was no fear in Samson, only a surge of pure divine power. He met the lion's charge not with a weapon, but with his bare hands. In a feat of impossible strength, he seized the lion by its jaws, and with a single mighty effort, tore the predator apart as one might tear a young goat. He stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He looked at the mangled carcass of the king of beasts, and then at his own hands, which were unstained by a single drop of the lion's blood, and held no weapon. He was shaken, not by the fight, but by the sheer unearthly power that had flowed through him. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the nature of the gift he carried. It was not his own strength, it was the strength of God himself, loaned to him for a purpose he was only beginning to grasp. In keeping with his often secretive nature, he didn't tell his parents about the encounter. It was a secret between him and his God, a confirmation of his unique and awesome destiny. But Samson's greatest strength was tethered to his most profound weakness. His physical power was unmatched, but his heart was easily ensnared. He was a man of immense passions, and his judgment was often clouded by what he saw and desired. And in that same Philistine town of Timnah, he saw her. She was a Philistine woman, one of the people who oppressed his own. By law and custom, she was forbidden to him. But Samson did not see an enemy. He saw beauty, a captivating grace that spoke directly to his lonely heart. He was instantly smitten, his mind consumed with a singular, overriding desire. He returned home, his heart ablaze. He went straight to his parents, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines," he declared. "Now therefore get her for me as a wife." Manoah and his wife were horrified. Their son, the child of prophecy, the Nazarite consecrated to God, wanted to marry a woman from the uncircumcised pagan Philistines? It was unthinkable. "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives, or among all our people, that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" His father pleaded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. They could not understand how their son, destined to begin the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines, would want to join himself to them in the most intimate way possible. But Samson was immovable. His desire had overwhelmed his reason, his vow, and his parents' pleas. His reply was the simple, stubborn cry of a heart that wants what it wants. "Get her for me, for she is right in my own eyes." What Samson and his parents did not know was that even in this act of apparent rebellion and poor judgment, a higher purpose was at work. The scripture tells us that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. God, in his mysterious sovereignty, was using Samson's flawed human desire, his weakness for a woman's beauty, as the very catalyst to ignite the conflict he had ordained. Samson thought he was pursuing love. God was maneuvering his chosen weapon into position. So the arrangements were made. On his way back to Timnah to finalize the marriage, Samson turned aside to see the carcass of the lion he had killed, and he saw something remarkable. A swarm of bees had made a home within the sun-bleached skeleton, and it was filled with honey. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it as he walked, a sweet treasure found in the vessel of his violent victory. He brought some to his parents, but he still did not tell them the story of where it came from. The secret of his strength and its first great display remained his alone. The wedding feast was a grand affair, held according to Philistine custom and lasting for 7 days. 30 of the finest Philistine young men were brought to be Samson's companions, ostensibly to celebrate with him, but in reality to watch him. They were the enemy, and this was an uneasy alliance at best. In the midst of the revelry, the wine flowing freely, Samson, filled with a sense of cleverness and confidence, decided to propose a riddle. It was a test of wits, but also a veiled boast about his secret triumph. "Let me now put a riddle to you," he announced to the 30 men. If you can solve it for me within the 7 days of the feast, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot solve it, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." The Philistines, proud and competitive, readily agreed. The stakes were set. Samson leaned forward, a cryptic smile on his face. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. The men were baffled. They spent 3 days debating, arguing, and trying to decipher the strange paradox. Eater and food, strong and sweet, the riddle made no sense. Their frustration grew with each passing day. The feast, which had begun in celebration, was now thick with tension. They were proud Philistine warriors and nobles, and they were being stumped by this backwater Israelite. Humiliation began to curdle into anger. By the 4th day, their patience was gone. They abandoned any pretense of sportsmanship and resorted to the cruel tactics of oppressors. They cornered Samson's new wife, their faces menacing, their voices low and threatening. "Coax your husband to explain the riddle to us," they hissed, "or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" The young woman was terrified. She was caught between the fearsome power of her own people and the mysterious, powerful man she had just married. She chose the path of survival. She went to Samson, her weapon not a threat, but tears. She wept, she pleaded, she clung to him. "You only hate me, you do not love me," she cried, her voice choked with manufactured sorrow. "You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." Samson was firm at first. "Behold, I have not told my own father and mother," he said, "and shall I tell you?" His logic was sound, but it was no match for her persistent emotional siege. For the remaining days of the feast, she wept and wheedled, wearing down his resolve. Every moment of quiet was filled with her sobbing accusations. The pressure was relentless. Finally, on the 7th day, exhausted by her constant crying and emotional blackmail, Samson broke. His heart, so susceptible to a woman's appeal, could not bear it any longer. He gave in. He told her the secret of the lion and the honey. The moment the secret left his lips, it was no longer his. His wife, her tears instantly drying, went straight to her countrymen and gave them the answer. Later that day, just before the sun set on the final day of the feast, the 30 men came to Samson, their faces smug with victory. "What is sweeter than honey?" they declared, "and what is stronger than a lion?" Samson's heart turned to ice. He looked at their triumphant faces and then at his wife, and he knew instantly that he had been betrayed. The intimacy he thought he was building was a sham. He had been played for a fool. The anger that rose in him was not the hot, quick anger of a simple man, but the cold, righteous fury of a betrayed champion. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him again, not with the controlled power that killed the lion, but with a vengeful fire. He looked at the Philistines, his voice dripping with bitter contempt. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," he snarled, "you would not have found out my riddle." His words were a declaration of war. He stormed out of the feast and traveled to Ashkelon, another major Philistine city. There, his fury unleashed, he struck down 30 men, not in a battle, but in a swift, brutal act of retribution. He took their fine garments, their changes of clothes, and returned to Timnah. He threw the spoils of his bloody victory at the feet of the men who had solved the riddle, his payment delivered in blood. His heart, now a maelstrom of rage and sorrow, could no longer bear to look at the woman who had sold his secret. He turned his back on his own wedding and went back to his father's house, the marriage unconsummated, the brief alliance shattered. After a time, his white-hot anger cooled to a smoldering coal. He still cared for the woman despite her betrayal and decided to return and claim her as his wife, perhaps believing things could be mended. He took a young goat as a customary gift and went to her father's house. But when he arrived and sought to go into her room, her father blocked the way. "I really thought that you utterly hated her," the man said, his voice laced with fear and a desperate attempt at diplomacy. "So I gave her to your companion, the one who was your best man. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead." The apology, the explanation, the pathetic offer, it all fell on deaf ears. For Samson, this was the final unforgivable insult. First, his secret was betrayed. Now his wife, his rightful wife, had been given to another man as if she were a piece of property to be traded. This was not just a personal slight, it was a profound dishonor. The fragile peace was irrevocably broken. Samson stood there, a cold, dangerous calm settling over him. He looked at his former father-in-law, but his gaze seemed to pass through him, looking out toward the vast fields of the Philistines. "This time," he said, his voice low and menacing, "I shall be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm." His plan for revenge was as cunning as it was devastating. He went out and, in an incredible feat of trapping and endurance, caught 300 foxes. He took them 2 by 2 and tied their tails together. In the knot between each pair of tails, he fastened a torch. Then, under the cover of darkness, he lit the torches and released the terrified animals into the standing grain of the Philistines. The result was an inferno. The panicked foxes ran wildly through the fields, a moving wall of fire that consumed everything in its path. The ripe, ready-to-harvest grain, the precious vineyards, the ancient olive groves, all were turned to ash. The economic heart of the region was utterly devastated. It was a brilliant, terrifying act of asymmetrical warfare, a single man crippling the resources of a nation. When the sun rose on the smoldering landscape, the Philistines were enraged. "Who has done this?" they demanded. The answer came quickly. "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." Their retribution was swift and horrifically cruel, but it was misdirected. Instead of confronting Samson himself, they unleashed their fury on the catalyst of the conflict. They went to the house of the woman from Timnah and her father, and they burned them both to death, the very fate they had threatened her with if she didn't betray her husband. News of this atrocity reached Samson. The woman he had once desired, the cause of all this turmoil, was dead, murdered by her own people. Any lingering softness in his heart was burned away, replaced by an iron resolve for vengeance. This was no longer about a riddle or a stolen wife. It was about blood. "Since you have acted like this," he declared, his voice a vow of death, "I will surely take my revenge on you, and after that I will cease." He went after them, not with an army, not with a strategy, but with the raw, unstoppable force of his own body. The scriptures say he struck them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. It was a brutal, personal, hand-to-hand massacre. He tore through their ranks, a whirlwind of destruction, until he was satisfied. After this bloody rampage, he withdrew, seeking refuge in a cleft of a great rock at a place called Etam. He was now a wanted man, the most dangerous enemy the Philistines had ever known. But his actions had also terrified his own people. The men of Judah, who had grown accustomed to Philistine rule, saw Samson not as a deliverer, but as a dangerous troublemaker who was upsetting the fragile, oppressive peace. They feared Philistine retaliation against them all. A militia of 3,000 men from Judah marched to the rock of Etam. They did not come to praise him or join his cause. They came to arrest him. They stood at a distance and called out, their voices echoing in the canyon. "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" Samson's reply was weary, tinged with the bitterness of being misunderstood by his own countrymen. "As they did to me, so I have done to them." Their response revealed the depth of their fear and subjugation. "We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hand of the Philistines." It was a heartbreaking moment. The people he was born to save were siding with the enemy to hand him over. Samson, a man who could have slaughtered all 3,000 of them, showed a moment of profound vulnerability. He was alone, betrayed by his lover, and now rejected by his own tribe. He agreed to their terms, but with one condition: "Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves." He could face an army of Philistines, but he could not bear the thought of being killed by the hands of his own brothers. They agreed, reassuring him, "No, we will only bind you securely and give you into their hand. We will surely not kill you." They took 2 new ropes, which had never been used, and bound him tightly. The hero of Israel, the child of prophecy, allowed himself to be trussed up like a common criminal and led away by his own people to be delivered to his enemies. As they brought him to a place called Lehi, the Philistines saw him coming. A great triumphant roar went up from their ranks. Here he was, the monster who had decimated their fields and slaughtered their men, now bound and helpless. They surged forward, eager for their prize, their swords and spears glinting in the sun. But as they closed in, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson one more time. The divine power surged through him, and the new ropes that bound him became as nothing. They snapped and melted away from his arms and wrists like flax that has caught fire. He was free. He looked around frantically for a weapon. His eyes fell upon a fresh jawbone of a donkey lying on the ground. It was an ignoble weapon, the discarded remnant of an unclean animal. But in Samson's hands, it became an instrument of epic slaughter. He seized it, feeling its weight and shape, and charged into the throng of astonished Philistines. He was a force of nature. The jawbone rose and fell, a blur of motion, crushing skulls and shattering bones. The triumphant shouts of the Philistines turned to screams of terror and pain. They had come for a bound prisoner. They found themselves in a whirlwind of death. He fought with a desperate, furious energy, driven by betrayal and divine power. When the dust settled and the last scream faded, 1,000 Philistine soldiers lay dead at his feet. Samson stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving, his body covered in sweat and blood. He held up the jawbone and cried out a victory chant, a grim pun on the Hebrew words for donkey and heap. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. But the elation of victory was quickly replaced by a desperate, life-threatening reality. In the heat of the battle and the dry heat of the sun, he was overcome with a powerful thirst. He was dying. He collapsed, his incredible strength spent. In his moment of weakness, he cried out to the God who had given him the victory. "You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised." It was a raw, honest prayer, the cry of a man pushed to his absolute limit, and God answered. The Lord split open the hollow place that was in Lehi, and water gushed out from the ground. Samson drank, and his spirit revived. He named the place En-Hakkore, which means the spring of him who called. For 20 years after this event, Samson judged Israel. He was their champion, their protector, a constant thorn in the side of the Philistines. They feared him, and as long as he walked the land, their dominion was challenged. Years passed. The name of Samson became a legend, whispered in fear in Philistine garrisons and in awe in Israelite villages. He was a one-man army, a paradox of divine power and all too human fallibility. He had judged Israel for 2 decades, a period of tense standoff where the Philistines, though still the overlords, dared not push too hard for fear of provoking the wrath of their unstoppable enemy. But the greatest battles Samson fought were not against Philistine armies. They were waged within the chambers of his own heart. The loneliness that had shadowed him since childhood had never truly left, and his yearning for connection, for the intoxicating allure of a woman's affection, remained his Achilles' heel. And so he found himself in the valley of Sorek, and there he found Delilah. Her name itself has a soft, lyrical quality, a name that could mean delicate or to languish. She was a woman of breathtaking beauty, but her true power lay not in her face or form, but in her eyes. She had a way of looking at a man that could bypass all his defenses, a gaze that promised understanding, acceptance, and desire all at once. For a man like Samson, who had spent his life being feared and set apart, such a gaze was more potent than any poison. He fell for her, and he fell hard. This love was not the impetuous desire he had felt for the woman of Timnah. It was a deeper, more consuming obsession. He believed he had finally found a home for his restless heart. But the enemies of Israel were ever watchful. They saw this new infatuation not as a romance, but as a strategic opportunity, the first real vulnerability they had ever seen in their invincible foe. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the rulers of their most powerful city-states, came to Delilah in secret. Their proposal was not one of threats, as it had been with Samson's first wife. It was one of pure, staggering greed. "Coax him," they said, their voices smooth and persuasive, "and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." It was a fortune beyond imagination, a king's ransom for the secret of one man. For Delilah, there was no conflict, no hesitation. Her heart was not with Samson, it was with the silver. The game began. She started her campaign with soft, playful seduction. As they lay together, she would whisper in his ear, her voice a silken caress. "Please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you." Samson, perhaps sensing the game or perhaps just toying with her, played along. He gave her a lie. "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried," he said, "then I shall become weak and be like any other man." Delilah relayed this information to the Philistine lords, who promptly supplied her with the 7 fresh bowstrings. She had Philistine soldiers hide in the inner room, waiting for her signal. Then, while Samson slept, she tied him securely with the strings. She had bound the most powerful man on earth. Her heart must have pounded with anticipation of her reward. She leaned close and cried out the prepared alarm, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." Samson awoke, not in a panic, but with an almost lazy power. He snapped the bowstrings as a single thread of tow snaps when it touches fire. His strength was undiminished. He stood up, looking around the empty room as the hidden soldiers slipped away in failure. Delilah's first attempt had failed. She feigned hurt, her pout a carefully crafted performance. "Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies," she said. "Please tell me how you might be bound." Her persistence was cloaked in the guise of a lover's playful game. Samson, still enjoying the deception, offered her a second lie. "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." The scene repeated itself. The Philistine lords provided the new ropes. The soldiers hid in the room. Delilah bound him as he slept. Again she cried the alarm, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And again he awoke and snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were mere threads. The ambush failed once more. Delilah's frustration was growing, but she honed her tactics. Her accusations became more pointed, her tone more wounded. "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Tell me how you might be bound." This time Samson wove a more elaborate, almost whimsical fabrication, one that touched tantalizingly close to the truth of his hair. "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web of the loom," he told her, essentially instructing her to weave his hair into the fabric being made on her loom and then secure it to the wall with a pin. It was a complex task, but Delilah was meticulous. While he slept deeply, his head in her lap, she carefully took the 7 great locks of his Nazarite hair and wove them into the loom's web. She then hammered the pin of the loom into the wall, securing the whole apparatus. His very head was now anchored to the structure of the house. Surely this would hold him. For a third time she screamed the warning, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke with a start, and with a single powerful movement, he stood up, ripping the entire loom, the pin, the web, the frame, out of the wall and floor, still attached to his hair. He had not only broken free, he had taken the instrument of his bondage with him. The game was over. Delilah dropped all pretense of playfulness. Now she wielded her most potent weapon, emotional warfare. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She began to press him daily, her words a constant nagging erosion of his will. "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me?" she would say, her voice a constant sorrowful refrain. "You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies." Day after day, she wore him down. Every waking moment was filled with her psychological torment. It was not a physical attack he could fight, but a spiritual and emotional one he could not. The scripture says that his soul was vexed to death. He was utterly exhausted, trapped not by ropes or looms, but by his own desperate love for a woman who was methodically destroying him. The strongest man in the world was brought to his knees by a woman's relentless words. Finally, he could bear it no longer. In a moment of complete and utter spiritual and emotional surrender, he gave her the final piece of his soul. He told her everything. He laid his head in her lap, the place of his greatest comfort and his ultimate downfall, and the truth poured out of him in a weary, defeated torrent. "A razor has never come upon my head," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "For I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." The secret was out. The covenant symbol of his power, the one thing that physically marked him as God's chosen, was now laid bare, and Delilah knew. She felt it in her very bones. This was not another lie. This was the devastating truth. She had won. She sent a message to the Philistine lords, her words humming with triumph. "Come up again, for this time he has told me all his heart." They came, their purses heavy with the promised silver. That night she lulled him to sleep with his head resting in her lap. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, a tender gesture used as a prelude to destruction. She called for a man, a barber, who came in silently. As Samson slept, oblivious, the man took a razor and, one by one, shaved off the 7 locks of his hair. The symbol of his strength, his dedication, his very identity, fell silently to the floor. The scripture records a heartbreakingly simple and terrifying phrase: "And the Lord departed from him." His strength was not in the hair itself, but in the covenant with God that the hair represented. By allowing that covenant to be broken, he had severed his connection to the source of his power, and he didn't even know it. Delilah, seeing the change, knowing her work was done, began to torment him. She shook him, no longer needing to feign her alarm. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." He awoke, his mind still groggy from sleep and his heart heavy from his confession. He thought it was like all the other times. "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free," he thought to himself. But when he tried to rise with his usual power, nothing happened. The divine energy was gone. His muscles, though still large, were just muscles. He was, as he had predicted, like any other man, and he did not know that the Lord had left him. In that moment of horrifying realization, as he struggled and found only his own mortal strength, the Philistines rushed in. There was no fight this time. This time, they seized him easily, and their revenge was terrible. To ensure this human weapon could never be aimed at them again, they gouged out his eyes. The man who had been ruled by what he saw was now condemned to total darkness. They bound him with bronze fetters, a metal stronger than any rope, and led him away in shame. The champion of Israel, the man of the sun, was now a blind, powerless captive. They took him to Gaza, and there they put him to work in the prison, forcing him to do the most grueling and demeaning work imaginable for a man, turning a heavy millstone to grind grain. The arms that had torn a lion apart, that had slain 1,000 men with a jawbone, were now chained to a stone, endlessly walking in a circle in darkness. The humiliation was absolute. His fall was complete. But in the darkness of that Philistine prison, in the monotonous, grinding rhythm of his punishment, a small, almost imperceptible miracle began to take place. The Philistines, in their gloating triumph, had overlooked one simple fact. His hair began to grow again. For Samson, the physical darkness was profound, but it was nothing compared to the darkness in his soul. Stripped of his strength, his sight, and his pride, he had nothing left but time. Time to think, time to reflect. The endless, circular path of the grinding mill became a metaphor for his own life, a cycle of passion, pride, and destruction. In the silence, broken only by the scrape of stone on stone and the jeers of his guards, he began a journey he had never taken before, an inward one. He replayed the events of his life, the angel's promise to his mother, the Nazirite vow he had so casually disregarded, the strength he had treated as his own personal possession, using it for vengeance and to win the affection of women who cared nothing for him. He thought of the lion, the riddle, the burning fields, the slaughter at Lahai. He thought of Delilah. The betrayal still stung, but now, in the humility of his brokenness, he could see his own role in it. He had walked into her trap with his eyes wide open, blinded not by her, but by his own desires. The growing hair on his head was more than just a biological process. Each inch represented a slow, painful return to his covenant. It was a physical reminder of the vow he had broken and the God he had forsaken. His prayers in that prison were no longer the arrogant demands of a champion or the desperate cries of a man dying of thirst. They were the quiet, broken whispers of a repentant sinner. He was no longer Samson the strong man, Samson the legend. He was just Samson, a blind man in a dark room, finally, truly, seeing himself for who he was. He was beginning to understand that true strength was not in his arms or his hair, but in his submission to God's will. The Philistines, meanwhile, were ready to celebrate. Their greatest enemy was vanquished. Their god, Dagon, had proven superior to the God of Israel. They declared a great festival and a sacrifice to Dagon. "Our God has delivered into our hands Samson, our enemy," they proclaimed. The temple of Dagon in Gaza, a massive structure, was filled to overflowing. The 5 lords of the Philistines were there, along with all the major officials, nobles, and military commanders. The rooftop alone held some 3,000 men and women, all eager to witness the final humiliation of their foe. The mood in the temple was ecstatic. Wine flowed, sacrifices were made, and the people sang praises to their idol of stone and wood. As the revelry reached its peak, a cry went up from the drunken crowd, "Call Samson that he may entertain us." The idea spread like wildfire. What better way to celebrate their victory than to mock the broken champion of their enemies? So they brought Samson out of the prison. He was a pathetic sight, blind, scarred, his once mighty frame thinned by prison labor. A young boy led him by the hand, guiding the man who once moved with terrifying speed and power. They placed him in the center of the great hall, between the 2 main pillars that supported the entire roof of the temple. The crowd erupted in jeers and laughter. They mocked his blindness. They taunted him about his lost strength. They ridiculed his God. Samson stood there, enduring the humiliation, his head bowed. But inside, a final prayer was forming. This was not a prayer for escape. It was a prayer for purpose. He leaned toward the boy who was guiding him, his voice a low whisper amidst the din. "Position me so that I may feel the pillars on which the temple rests, that I may lean against them." The boy, seeing no harm in the request of a blind, broken man, guided Samson's hands to the massive stone columns. Samson's hands touched the cool, solid stone. He could feel the immense weight they bore, the vibrations of the thousands of revelers above and around him. This was the heart of the Philistine power structure, both literally and figuratively. All his enemies were in one place, celebrating his downfall and blaspheming the name of his God. He knew this was his final moment. His life, so full of wasted potential and selfish choices, had led him to this one singular opportunity for redemption. He steadied his feet, He bowed his head one last time, but his prayer was no longer silent. It was a direct, desperate plea to the God he had finally returned to. "O Lord God," he prayed, his voice filled with an intensity that no one in the roaring crowd could hear. "Please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." It was a personal request, born of his suffering, but it was also more. It was a plea to vindicate the honor of the God whose name was being dragged through the mud. And in that moment, God answered. The strength returned. It was not the wild, explosive power of his youth. It was a deeper, more focused, more profound force. It surged through his arms, into his hands, a final, magnificent gift. He was no longer just a man. He was an instrument of divine judgment. He placed his right hand on one pillar and his left hand on the other. He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly on the temple floor. He bent his back, every muscle in his body straining. Then, with a final guttural roar that was drowned out by the party, he shouted the last words he would ever speak. "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then a deep, groaning sound began to emanate from the pillars. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone under the impossible pressure of his hands. The pillars, the very foundation of the temple, began to shift. The crowd on the roof felt a tremor. The drunken laughter began to falter, replaced by looks of confusion. Then, with a sound like thunder, the pillars gave way. The massive stone roof, weighing hundreds of tons, lost its support. It hung for a second in the air, and then it came crashing down in a cataclysmic avalanche of stone, timber, and bodies. The screams of the terrified Philistines were cut short as the entire structure imploded, crushing everyone and everything within it. The Temple of Dagon was reduced to a mountain of rubble. In his death, Samson killed more of his enemies than he had in his entire tumultuous life. The 3,000 on the roof, the lords and nobles below, all were gone. The entire leadership of the Philistine people was wiped out in a single, catastrophic moment. And beneath it all lay Samson, the child of the sun, his final act not a display of prideful strength, but one of sacrificial redemption. He had died with his enemies, but he had died fulfilling the purpose for which he was born. The man who lived by the strength of his own arms found his greatest victory only when he surrendered everything to God. The story of Samson is more than a tale of a strong man. It's a profound and timeless lesson for every one of us. It shows us that our greatest God-given talents can become our most dangerous snares if they are not guided by humility and purpose. It's a reminder that true strength isn't about what we can do on our own, but about our willingness to lean on a power greater than ourselves, especially when we are at our weakest. Samson's life was messy, flawed, and full of mistakes, yet in the end, he found his way back. His story is a testament to the fact that it is never too late for a final act of faith, a final prayer that can change everything. If this journey into the heart of one of history's most complex heroes resonated with you, consider subscribing to our channel. We are dedicated to digging deeper, to uncovering the powerful human lessons buried in these ancient and epic stories. Click that subscribe button and join our community as we continue to explore the tales that have shaped our world. Thank you for listening.